Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our latest installment of the Business Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy Lunchtime Nuggets. And we are so pleased to feature both a colleague and a dear friend, Roger Entner, founder and president of Recon Analytics, one of the country's premier research and analysis firms. Roger, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For those of us who are wondering why there's just one of us instead of both Jen and Carolyn, Jen is going to join us. She was tied up right before this, but she's going to pop in when she can. In the meantime, Roger, I took a read of an article, I think it was in Fierce Wireless yesterday, covering some Twitter commentary that you had put out there in reaction to the discussion at both NTIA's Spectrum Summit on Monday and the Aspen report that was released. And I'm curious, bring us up to date. I've been getting a lot of questions like, Roger, he's on fire.
Well, the NTIA symposium, I was very grateful they put it together. They had like spectacular speakers, put a lot of insights there. And but then they talked about the massive success that CBRS is. And I hear that all the time inside the Beltway, but I can't find it outside the Beltway, right? When you look at it and take a step back, there's on one level there were the spectrum auctions, right, for CBRS, which were by far the lowest, achieving auctions in the last 20 years. Among a whole series of home runs that were the biggest auctions out there. So it was a massive vote of no confidence by people putting their money where their mouth is with PAL licenses. Then you have dozens of companies, right? Yeah, but they bought one or two licenses wherever they are. The biggest winner was Verizon, which rolled out CBRS because they had no other mid-band spectrum. And now they have C-band and they spend, $60 billion on it. They go gangbuster on C-band, no longer on CBRS. And
what I thought was interesting, Roger, is your point that every time you see forecasts with respect to the market for CBRS, the forecasts seem to be going down rather than up, which is an unusual trend if this was really the gangbuster that it was predicted to be.
Exactly. And so there was a lot of, and then hello, Jen.
Hello, Jen.
Hello, everyone.
Good.
We're just getting caught up on Roger's, he was on Twitter yesterday commenting on some of the issues that were raised at the NTIA Spectrum Summit. And what was picked up in the press was Roger's thoughts around, well, if this was such a big success, why can't I find anyone, operating wide-scale networks using CBRS? So kind of like, show me the money. And I think he's having a hard time trying to find it.
And I have a hard time finding that, right? It's like, I spoke at a conference a couple of months ago with the guys at Deere who bought 5 PAL licenses, and they're only testing around with it. And they said like there are only a couple of applications where PAL is actually better than Wi-Fi, and so we don't see these numbers. And then people say like, yeah, but GAA, right? The dirty little secret of the sharing spectrum of CBRS is that there's no sharing mechanism for general access participants. And when you go to the website, it says like, please expect to be, the FCC website says like, people have no expectations of interference protection. So people have to come to gentleman agreements of how not to interfere with each other, which is like preposterous in the age of everything going automatically.
So certainly not efficient, and definitely at odds with the whole reason the FCC and Congress embraced using auctions as a tool to
Yes.
allocate spectrum.
And
Jen, really, really curious. Interestingly enough, there was a piece out earlier this week from a public interest voice indicating that perhaps now is the time where raising auction revenues is somehow a dirty little undertaking and should not be an objective when you're thinking about allocating spectrum. And just curious how that kind of take on reality resonates with investors and folks that you're talking to and working with these days.
So, what I want to make sure I understand. So, starting new auctions to fund.
No,
No.
there's an argument that the using auctions as a way to allocate spectrum, it could be perfectly fine, but the emphasis should not be on maximizing the revenue raised. So, for example, the response on the CBRS example that Roger was talking about before you joined, which is it generated the smallest amount of auction revenue in essentially the history of auctions when you look at comparable amounts of spectrum. And there are some that would say, yeah, and that's perfectly fine because we shouldn't really focus on maximizing the money raised through auctions that goes to general treasury. And I'm just curious how that resonates with investors and folks such as yourselves who are looking at the spectrum market.
Yeah, I mean, I think for investors, there's still many speculators who, you have the Columbia Capital and others who have participated. I'm just betting that they're not going to be building towers. So the thought would be that they will trade that for a carrier that is willing to pay, significantly more than they paid for it. And I think you've already seen that, right, with T-Mobile's deal with Columbia recently for 600 megahertz spectrum. But I think that what you're seeing, and Roger, maybe this is your point, sorry to join late, but CBRS being the lowest priced auction really speaks loudly to the value of licensed spectrum where the carrier, i.e. Verizon, or AT&T, has control over it. And they're willing to pay a premium for that. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
and
Roger, over to you.
yeah, no, and when we look at it, we started auctions with the explicit because originally in the United States allocated wireless licenses based on a beauty contest.
Correct.
And then we realized that the winners of that beauty contest were making windfall profits. They were becoming millionaires and billionaires because the value of the spectrum is there. The question is who will get the spectrum, who will make the money off the spectrum. And in auctions, the logic why we did auctions was that the American people through the Treasury should be a big beneficiary of the value of this natural resource.
Right. Which makes perfect sense. Which makes perfect sense when you remember that by statute, spectrum is held in the public interest, right? So nobody owns it outright. It always reverts back to, the public, as it were.
And why should we redistribute wealth from the American people to individuals who are winners of this auction of this beauty contest, right?
Right.
So it would be, and it's funny that a lot of the people who are advocating for not auctions are the ones who are decrying the redistribution of wealth from the people to a few individuals. This will just accelerate that. On top of it, people say a lot of things that they say will do or might do and have great ideas, but money speaks louder than any intentions. And if you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, that is the surest intention that this is the best value and it's the best idea that will win. And so if we want to use our scarce resources, and we all are in agreement that spectrum is scarce. If we want to dedicate spectrum for many, many years of some idea of some guy or girl who says like, oh, I have a wonderful idea, but I have no money, why don't we do this? Then sure, but it will not be, in all likelihood, it will not be the optimal idea.
And I think, and we can move on to other topics. I think what it boils down to is yes, it's a scarce resource based on what technology is capable of doing with it right now, right? So we're extracting more efficiency and more value, as it were, out of spectrum now than we did 20 years ago because the equipment and the antenna and the receivers, even though there's more improvements that can happen there, have improved immeasurably, right? And we've got other technologies. But at the end of the day, there will be increased demand for spectrum-based solutions and connectivity. And so it seems to me as the United States is developing a national spectrum plan, which is what the NTIA has been tasked to do by Congress, it really needs to be a sensible, and I think this was your point, Roger, in the social engagement yesterday, we have to be realistic and mature, right? We need a place for people to experiment and figure out, future uses and future capabilities, absolutely. But we also need to continue feeding the capacity of the large-scale commercial wireless networks upon which a lot of this, if not all of the unlicensed innovations, depend on.
And we just
So,
allocated 1.2 gigahertz, 1,200 megahertz in the 6 gigahertz band exclusively to unlicensed use. This is the
right.
largest contiguous band of spectrum around,
Right. Jen, I don't know if you saw it. Analysis Mason just put out a new report in which it's actually a detailed deck. And for those of you who are watching us today, we can get the link out to the RSVPs. So in this deck, what they do is they assess what the current U.S. spectrum allocations are among commercial use, government use, and a larger bucket unlicensed. So U.S. comparisons within the U.S., and then also where do we stack up in terms of those three buckets of allocations compared to other countries. And one of the really stark graphics that jumped out at me was how significantly more unlicensed spectrum has been designated in the United States and how little licensed commercial spectrum has been allocated compared to not only our Western European trading partners, but our more significant, sort of adversaries, I guess you'd call them, in China and in other countries. So more for folks to read, but I think those data points are going to start, facilitating another round of conversations as folks are putting together that national spectrum plan inside the Beltway. But Roger, really interested in your thoughts as we're heading into the end of the year. This is typically when we start seeing, the cooler devices, the new plans as all the carriers race to the end of the year and have a really good, strong fourth quarter. Curious what you think is going to be the cool new thing, or what trends are you seeing amongst the big guys and the small guys as we head into the last part of the year?
Yeah,
And can I add, who's your favorite player right now to win of the carrier side? I'll add that.
all right. Well, the cool new thing is the iPhone, right?
I finally got one.
You finally
That's appropriately sized. It's very exciting. And I can see it. The typeface is huge. I love it.
Awesome. What we did, we have the fastest, most agile consumer insights product out there. We survey 10,000 people every week with a lot of questions. And of course, we ask about the iPhone. And what we find is really interesting, and we did the most recent one before they launched, and we're about to run it again after it launched. But even in July, end of July, when we did the last iPhone questions, most people were gravitating to the iPhone Pro and the iPhone Pro Max, and which are the larger, more powerful versions. And when you look at what Apple came out with in the iPhone Pro, in the regular iPhone and in the Plus, they used the same processor as last year. And only the Pro and the Pro Max got the newest, fastest processor. And so people must have anticipated that, because there's really this this flight to quality. And in a way, if you're already financing, you know, $800, $900, what's another $100 or two? It's like $2 or $3 per month more. And especially with carriers providing really attractive promotions of up to $1,000. You know, if you get an iPhone Pro Max, you're essentially paying $100 over 2 or 3 years finance. So you're paying like a couple of bucks a month. You might as well get the best one out there. So that's what we're seeing there. When we're switching to carriers, who are the winners and losers, you know, it's the wireless industry has a lot of inertia. And we said it for a while, and Hans Vestberg confirmed it a couple of days ago. Verizon is going to lose for the 3rd time in a row customers in the consumer market, which is like just unprecedented. It's not only unprecedented for Verizon, it's also unprecedented for anybody but Sprint. You know, this track, right? And that's not necessarily the best comparison you want to have. In terms of winners,
And Hesse, blazing trails.
yeah. In terms of winners, both T-Mobile and AT&T are doing very well. In the last couple of quarters, it was AT&T winning on phones and T-Mobile winning on total net adds when you include all the different things. This quarter, it's going to be neck and neck on phones, but on total, it will be T-Mobile without a doubt. We also.
Oh, I was going to ask you, is it less now where we are? Because I'm assuming the US is well over 100% penetrated in wireless, right? Is it less a net ad game and now more about an ARPU game or average revenue per user, how to extract more wallet share?
It is still a net ad game.
It
right?
is, okay.
It is still a net ad game because, you know, we just did also a module on children and wireless.
Okay.
And, you know, a lot of people have asked, so where are all these net ads coming from?
Right.
And we run a survey around it and ask parents on phones. So we did that in March, and we did this, you know, a couple of weeks ago. And so in March, and the number, in March we did the survey, and 15% of 6-year-olds had a cell phone already.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say 6? As in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Yes.
6?
As
How
the
are those little hands hold the phone, for goodness sake?
When they go into elementary school, that was March. We asked it again.
50?
We asked it again at the end of August, like when basically back to school was over, and we asked them, tell us how many of your children have had a phone for more than 3 months. We did deliberately more than 3 months because of the school massacre, right? And the number for 6-year-olds came back again with 15%. Which is basically identical, confirming our numbers from March. And then we asked them, how many of them got a phone in the last 3 months? And that was another 17%. So wow. 1/3 of kids who went to school for the first day, a couple of weeks ago, went to school with a cell phone. And we asked then, how many of you are going to buy a phone for your kid by the end of the year? And then that number goes up to 50%. And we have this for every age cohort. So we have this for 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. The numbers go down, you know, because 16 and 17-year-olds are mostly all of them have adopted it, so that number goes down. But the number in the elementary school levels are just going through the roof. And this is what will be driving net adds in this quarter and in the next quarter, right? And so because people want to know how their kids are. They're sending their most treasured children to school, and then they all too often we see these.
So do you think it's a safety issue rather than, okay.
It is a safety issue. When you don't get info, when people watch on television shootings in schools, they want to know how their children are, because they have zero trust in the authorities to properly communicate how their children are in a timely fashion. And so they're getting them a cell phone.
Wow. Switching topics again, away from the consumer market, I'm curious. So, Jen, a favorite topic of yours and mine over the years is poor Legato. Although I don't feel sorry for them. I'd love to get your reaction. So for some of you in the audience that aren't up to speed, Legato was waiting on a release of a report from the National Academy of Science, in which I think they were hoping they were going to receive a blessing for their full use of spectrum as they had suggested. And the NAS came out with their report, which was largely, gave the impression, I think, to most that, there's a way to make all of this work, except, as I said to Jen, one word, which was some, S-O-M-E, some interference would be caused. And that kind of looked, in my view, was a huge open door for DoD and others to come in and say, listen, we have such critical operations, not even one instance of interference can be accepted. So I think the ball is back in the FCC's court, but I'm curious, Roger, what you think of the situation and how you think it might play out. And Jen, equally curious what you're hearing from your end of the world in terms of how this might go down.
Well, I think the FCC, will probably listen to the Department of Defense has huge sway, right? And it's very good in portraying worst case scenarios, that it has to work all the time, and the CIO of the Department of Defense also spoke at the NTIA department and came out with very strong words, which I don't think he realized were actually an invitation, but we can come back to that again. But I think the FCC will use the some interference may occur as, either doing another investigation and playing on time, right? Or simply deny it. My guess is probably we need another investigation, figure out which are some of the devices and how can we mitigate this. And then we have another 5 years of conversation topics out of that decision, right?
Jen, do you think they stick around and try to pursue this?
In my world, there's definitely some very smart money following it. Like Leon Cooperman is probably the prime example. Every time he's on CNBC, he's talking about his investment in Legato. That said, I think for other investors, it's just not a clean story. And therefore, given the amount of, it's how much risk do you want to take on with it? I think that's the big question. I think it's a concern, like not all spectrum's created equally, and everyone does lazy math, as I'd say, and say Verizon bought C-band for $53 billion. Therefore, every bit of spectrum has to be worth that much. And you really gotta, as Roger said, kind of peel back the onion here. So I'd say most of Wall Street, with the exception of few, are proceeding with caution here.
Also, time is against Legato because channel sizes are going up. Carriers want to have 10 or 100 megahertz of channel sizes. And that simply doesn't exist in the spectrum that Legato has. And when you have 5 5 megahertz, it doesn't move the needle on speed, right? When people expect hundreds of megabits, adding carrier aggregation, which costs power, is overhead, all of these things, to get another 5 megahertz, the diminishing returns are moving rapidly away. 10 years ago, the industry went gaga over 5 megahertz or 10 megahertz. Now, we have 20 megahertz channels. We have 140 megahertz nationwide. These are the categories that they think now, and they simply don't exist in Legado's band.
I would agree. And I read something interesting, Roger, you probably know this, but Neville Ray spoke recently, and he said that who's the CTO of T-Mobile, on their top plans, Magenta Max, people are using 39 gigabits of data a month. To put that in perspective, in the Ericsson 2022 outlook this year, they predicted that the average usage on smartphones was 15 gigabits. So you're seeing that more than double, and just that channel width is going to be so critical to everything that's needed.
Yeah, and even more so as wireless is being used, or the wireless spectrum is being used for fixed wireless access. And here, the usage on fixed wireless is very similar to, people are using it like a fixed connection. And then you're in the 600, 800 megabyte monthly usage. The constrained spectrum plan for T-Mobile offers you 100 gigabytes, right? It's just like 10 megahertz. Great, but
So can you guys talk a little bit about fixed wireless? Depending on which CEO's comments you read, I know some are more bullish on it being, something very real. Others see it as, well, it's a kind of a temporary, a phenomenon. It'll work out in some areas, but not in others. I'm just curious. Do you, obviously, your former colleagues, Jen, are very bullish on this and see. Especially T-Mobile's push on their fixed wireless access plans, this could actually be something that could take significant share away from cable. So I'm just curious, number one, what you guys think is this like a real thing that could be a real competitive force in the marketplace compared to other broadband solutions? And if so, what does that say about spectrum demand? As Jen, as you were just saying, if what we're seeing is double the predicted use, what does that mean in terms of the network's capability to handle wide-scale fixed wireless?
Roger, what do you think? I mean, I'm less of a bull on fixed wireless, I'll be honest. I'm a fiber baby, and I believe fiber will always prevail.
Well, I agree with everyone. And so this, and that's not even a contradiction, right? So fixed wireless this quarter will be massive. I think, we will see several 100,000, 300,000-400,000 fixed wireless net adds at Verizon, and maybe even close to 1 million for T-Mobile. And people will run around and say like, oh my God, it's the end of cable and all of this, these things. The key question is where and from who, right? So right now, when, we're measuring and we're looking at fixed wireless on a weekly basis. So, and we ask people, where are you? We ask everybody by zip code, where are they? And so, for example, right now, 55% of AT&T's fixed wireless customers are in a city. 37% of T-Mobile's customers are in a city. When I look at rural, only 20% of Verizon's and 32% of T-Mobile's are in rural. Jen is absolutely right. In urban areas and in suburban areas, fixed wireless has only limited legs. And but in rural America, with Verizon having like 200 megahertz in the upper Midwest and Montana, 200 megahertz is very competitive with fiber at a much lower speed, especially as Verizon said, we are putting C-band on every cell site where we have, right? So they will, because the mobility case will take care of it. And so in rural America, absolutely, this has legs, this will take a while. It's just that the current growth is not coming from rural America, it's coming from urban, and it's running out. T-Mobile's metered plans are an admission of that, right? When I look at who is getting, and then, the poor CEOs of the cable companies get always pestered of like, oh my God, fixed wireless. How many customers are you losing from fixed wireless, right? Current fixed, and they're like, oh, we don't see it.
So do you know the answer? What is the percentage?
I know the answers why they don't see it. So for example, of the more than 2 million, like now probably around 2.5 million fixed wireless subscriber, 14% come from Comcast and 12% come from Charter. That's like 200,000, 250,000 each. With them having, and that's over the last 9 months, they lost that many. They're not seeing that in the numbers. It's for them and their churn of like 2% or so, with including moving and everything.
Right.
It's a drop in the bucket. For a Verizon and a T-Mobile, it's the growth story, and the hockey stick is spectacular. But in the big picture for a cable company right now, it doesn't matter.
Can you clarify, were you suggesting that fixed wireless in rural is significantly slower than fiber?
No, I think it will be competitive with fiber.
Yeah.
If you have 140, 160, 200 megahertz of spectrum, and one of the hallmarks of rural is that there are not a lot of people. If you have 200 megahertz and share it with 2 people, you have hundreds of megabits of speed.
That's a good experience. That's a good gaming experience.
Yes, it's a really
So
great
I've heard.
People will be very, very happy.
Really, I just wanted to touch on one last general topic before we close out for this week's session, and that is, what are your thoughts? And again, for both of you, quite frankly, what are your thoughts in terms of opportunities for small and mid-sized companies to go after some of this BEAD money, in terms of either offsetting their capex or supplementing? Do you think there's legit opportunities for some of these folks?
Oh, absolutely. And they have prime opportunities, right? We have to remember that the majority of rural America, the vast majority of rural America is served by small rural telcos and cable too. We're helping one small rural telco with about 30,000 customers right now. And these guys know because the money comes from the states, right? They know the people at the states a lot better than a big centralized company. And so I think the small and medium-sized rural providers will do very, very well. And
now here's a question though, Roger. Is there a threat to that actually happening if there is a preference at the state level consistent with what NTIA put into their notice of funding opportunities, that there should be a preference to give this money to government-owned networks or municipal entities? Does that reduce the opportunities for the small rural guys who are doing most of the connecting out there?
Well, a little bit, but typically where the municipal guys are, the rural guy, the rural ILECs have not gone.
Right.
And in the footprint of the company we work with, one town has a municipal network, but they're actively thinking about overbuilding that municipal network because it's not very good. And so
Right.
they actually see it as an opportunity to expand. And so if they can overbuild all the DSL that they have and expand out, everybody wins. Wherever fiber goes, very quickly, the fiber penetration goes to like 40% plus and becomes
Right.
profitable. And so
Jen, music to your ears.
Yeah.
Exactly. Music to my ears. I know. Roger, I would love to ask one last question. You're always great at identifying trends that others, everyone's looking one way, you're looking at the other. What's the trend right now that people are not focused on enough?
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing and focusing is the crossover between prepaid and postpaid, and that it becomes more and more fluid, right? And especially in the current inflationary environment, we're seeing people cutting back and are looking for better opportunities. Today's launch of, for example, Total by Verizon is one of those. It's not a canary in the coal mine, but it's probably more like an albatross in the coal mine with Verizon moving in, of launching a new prepaid plan to round out their perspective. But we're seeing folks like Mint making significant impact in that part and eating into postpaid. But then, when you look at T-Mobile, they are migrating every quarter 150,000 prepaid customers into postpaid. So that delineation that like 5 and 10 years ago was pretty solid, because we look at all providers, we have trends on 14 mobile providers. The largest mobile provider I can't tell you really cool things about is like Ultra Mobile with 750,000 subs. But so that play is becoming really interesting, of prepaid to postpaid and vice versa.
Interesting.
Go ahead. Did you have any follow-up, Jen?
No, always good, always great for the good trends.
Roger, there is a question in the chat around whether Verizon's separating consumer from business net adds. Is that one of the reasons Verizon is seeing net declines in the consumer area for 3 consecutive quarters? Was wondering if you could just respond to that.
Well, it makes it easier to identify that they're losing consumers because everybody else calculates or provides the aggregate number. But them separating it out into 2 groups has not led the consumer group to lose customers. The business group is performing very, very well at Verizon. It's punching consistently above its weight. It's like a quarter of the company. But even there, only the small and medium business wireless part is growing. So there's a lot of turmoil underneath the headline. But splitting the 2 out for recording did not do in consumer.
Had no impact on what the resulting reports were. Well, thank you very, very much, Mr. Entner. Really appreciate your insights. It's been really fun reading your work lately. Not that it ever isn't not fun. Jen, thank you so much for being able to join. I'm sorry you turned into more of an interviewee instead of a co-host.
I'm taking notes, but Roger has the good quote and a definite Twitter follower. A must.
All right, thank you.
So,
and yeah, we also have a weekly podcast, right?
Oh, that's right. And your podcast. A Week with Roger. It's on my Black Lab walk route. I always listen to you and Don.
Yeah, it's just 15 minutes designed for Jen to walk her dog.
There you
Um,
go.
yeah,
Thank you all
Good.
very much.
you.
Everybody should keep their eyes open for a save the date. We're going to be pushing out for next month's Spectrum Summit that we're going to actually try to hold in person here in Washington, D.C. Until then, thank you for joining us. Jen, as always, great to see you.
Great to
Roger,
see
thank you
you
very
both.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you guys for the time. Take care.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.